You've made it to Chiro Hustle Live. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession. This week's episode is brought to you by Clothes for Chiro, Posture Screen, Imaging Services, Zinget Solutions, Chiro Moguls, 5-Star Management, Chiro Health USA, Local Gold, Rhino Coaching, Mahalo Wellness, Chiro Thin, Peter Goldman Zone School of Healing, Go Get Talks, Fit to Lift, The Goodman Factor, Unmarket Your Practice, and McCaffrey Clinical Mentoring. Let's hustle. Hey everybody, Jim Chester coming to you live today. I have Cara Magrogan Sachs coming in from Portland, Maine, and I am coming in from the Mile High City today. This is Denver, Colorado. And today's afternoon edition of the Chiro Hustle Live, we are going to talk about, I'm going to roll it on the bottom of the screen right now, and it is Maine's freedom of choice. And I know, Cara, you did some amazing grassroots work out there in the state of Maine to advocate freedom of choice for people that were having mandates put on them. So I'm not going to take the conversation. I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to share this message to all the groups that I'm a part of. So tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing and why it's so important for the freedom of this country.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm coming from a very snowy Maine here today. We're snowed out across the state. We have had a lot going on threatening our freedom, especially as it pertains to medical rights and medical choice here in Maine. Many people are probably listening in from other states that have had similar battles, but we had a vaccine mandate law that swept through our legislature in the last year. It started in January, passed in June. And we stood up as a really organic grassroots group of mostly parents and medical professionals and educators who really didn't agree with the law. The law as it stands restricts access to education of any kind. So it's preschool all the way through higher ed. It includes online learning. Trade schools, and it's public, private, and parochial schools. So access to education for any age requires students to participate fully in the vaccine schedule if they wish to obtain education of any kind in the state of Maine. So parents were really unhappy about that, as you can imagine, as that impacts our freedom and right to decide what goes into our body and our children's body. There's like no greater freedom than that in the world. And so we stood up, we undertook a people's veto, which is a great opportunity. There's about 23 states, I think, that allow them to challenge your legislature when your legislature passes something that you don't feel is in the best interest of your state. And we spent the summer out canvassing to get enough signatures to get our bill on the ballot so that we could have a popular vote rather than just, take what our legislature was passing. And we were able to successfully do that. And so right now we're just campaigning for a vote in March.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that you had to do in order to get positioned to make these moves was you had to get a petition signed. Let's talk about what that entailed and how challenging that was for you to put together a petition to actually get on the ballot.
Yes. Yeah, so statewide referendums, it's a little bit easier here in Maine than some other states had it. I think the criteria is the same everywhere, that you need 10% of the last gubernatorial vote. So it's everybody in your state that voted in the last election for governor. So in Maine, that number was only 63,000 people. And so we needed to get signatures from registered Maine voters totaling at least 63,000 signatures. And so that's harder than it sounds, especially on a topic related to vaccines, where the propaganda is so strong in the media that you're approaching people trying to talk about a topic that people don't typically speak about openly. And it was a long summer. We had a huge network of parents that were out with kids in tow. And you're literally just standing out at the farmer's market or, in front of the coffee shop. We did a lot of town dumps, actually, which was exciting, fairs and festivals. and you're just standing there, you're just a registered voter standing there with a clipboard and asking people if they agree that the citizens of Maine, in our case, should have the right to vote as a state on the issue of vaccine mandates. And so we were able to, we turned in just over 95,000 signatures, and we ended up with an extra 19,000, or just over 16,000, valid signatures to successfully get on the ballot.
So, one of those things that you said, that you stood out there with clipboards and long days, kids in tow. I know that that's something that a lot of people within chiropractic can really understand too, because when you go out there and fight for the freedom of natural health, it is a weekend job. It is a Monday through Friday job as well. What did it feel like for the accomplishment for you and your group to actually hit those number of petition signatures?
It was really incredible. I have never been part of such an awesome grassroots movement. I was not involved politically before this bill, believe it or not, at all. And many of the parents that are involved in our group have not been involved politically either, until this was sort of a movement that you realized all of a sudden that your freedoms were being taken away, and it was almost too late. You're kind of rising up too late. So we were really fortunate to have the opportunity to do something about that through the petitioning process. And it was just an incredible feeling. It was a nail biter all summer, right up until the end. And we were counting, on a whiteboard, sort of like election night, the night before turn-in. And it was just an incredible feeling for everybody. We obviously know the work isn't done, but making the ballot in and of itself is a huge deal.
And as a journalist, this is a huge topic, because I know that as we develop as a culture, we have to have the freedom to make decisions for our families, and for those that have kids, and even those that have elderly folks in their families. Those are probably the two sectors that are being attacked the fastest. Yes. Because they aren't the ones that are able to make decisions rightfully for themselves. So what does it mean for Maine to win in March, for this whole nation to be able to start making more informed decisions for the health of our country?
Yeah, so there's a famous political saying that says, as Maine goes, so goes the nation, in sort of predicting political trends with elections and things like that. And so that's been sort of like a guiding image or a quote for us, in understanding that we can really set a precedent here for other states. And we've heard from a lot of people across the country who fought similar battles, feeling like it's given them inspiration that there's actually something you can do. There's similar issues that have gone on, most notably in California and New York, and people really feeling like they don't have a voice in the process. So, it's just regular parents who've gotten together and stood up and organized over something that we don't believe is right. And we're seeing a lot of momentum there. So we feel like, if we're not successful at the ballot, we've still had a huge movement and awakening about the necessary, how necessary it is to participate politically and defend your freedoms and be aware of what's happening. And if we are able to succeed, we feel like it's going to set a huge precedent across the country in terms of defending freedom as it pertains to medical choices.
Yeah, it almost brings tears to my eyes thinking about what is happening behind the scenes. And it's not based on health, it's based on money. And Right. It's not based on medical doctors, it's not based on chiropractors, it's based on big pharma. And actually what that system's doing is it's putting chiropractors against medical doctors. It's actually making medical doctors not want to be medical doctors anymore, because what it's doing is turning medical doctors into prescribers and not holistic healers. And it's taking them and saying that chiropractors are wrong, and it's telling chiropractors that medical doctors are wrong when they're both right. But what they're doing is they're allowing themselves to be conquered by a bigger machine, which doesn't care about the medical doctors or the chiropractors. Right. All they want to do is have people being prescribed. So when we think about this whole mandate within our country, let's talk a little bit more closely to the fact of what happened in California and what happened actually in New York, because I know that those are two of the most populated states in this country. Maine is one of the least populated states in the country. So us winning from a boundary standpoint of a small state, small population, in comparison to a larger land grab of population like a New York or California. What does it look like in the balance of like where we're going, and why do you think that the government chose those two states to knock off first?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. I think that I would guess that the media hysteria in larger states. I know in California, sort of the media impetus, as I had seen it as an outsider, was like a Disneyland measles outbreak, right? That was like a year or 2 years, I think, before the mandate came down in California. And New York had the recent measles outbreak in the spring, right before they sort of went in and removed the religious exemption overnight, I believe, without process. I could be wrong on that, but I believe we were right in the middle of our own fight, so I wasn't paying as close of attention. But I believe in New York's case, it was particularly extreme. And now California has gone back in and actually removed doctors' ability to write medical exemptions. They're only permitted to write 5 per person. So I think my guess would be the media piece is different in states that are much more populated than Maine is. I would think that probably has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and as I paid attention to what was happening, it seemed that they want to control the home.
Yes.
And they want to make sure that the parents feel disempowered. I know that that's a huge component for a lot of kids because they're saying that if you don't do this, then your kids can't go to school.
Right.
A lot of parents are obviously switching gears to do homeschooling. What does this do for like the dynamics of like how kids develop when they tell like families that you can't send your kids to school? Yeah. And they have to like have this thing happening to them with this medical intervention for them to feel normal. What is that really doing to our culture?
Right. And I'm actually, my background, clinical social worker, and my specialty is trauma and loss in kids. So I had first sort of been interested in this from that perspective, from a trauma perspective, when you're sort of talking about taking that group of kids that they may only be missing like the chickenpox vaccine. It doesn't mean that they're completely unvaccinated. Maybe they are, maybe they're missing 1 dose, and you're telling them that all of a sudden, you're dirty, you're dangerous, you can't be around your friends, and you can't go to school. And there's nothing more like quintessential childhood than school for kids. And so that really concerns me on a national level, as a parent and as a clinician, about what that's doing to the kids that are being removed. And, that people feel so comfortable making these sweeping decisions and disregarding, I don't even think they're considering the impact on kids from being removed.
You've made it to Chiro Hustle Live. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession. This week's episode is brought to you by Clothes for Chiro, Posture Screen, Imaging Services, Zinget Solutions, Chiro Moguls, 5-Star Management, Chiro Health USA, Local Gold, Rhino Coaching, Mahalo Wellness, Chiro Thin, Peter Goldman Zone School of Healing, Go Get Talks, Fit to Lift, The Goodman Factor, Unmarket Your Practice, and McCaffrey Clinical Mentoring. Let's hustle. Yeah, I think it becomes greater also as we become an adult culture as well. When we start thinking about if they're mandating kids to start getting jabbed in order to go to school, what does it look like as they start getting control of the adult population and the things that they can say, like, oh, you can't send your kids to college unless they get these vaccines. You can't get a job unless you do this. So they start with the kids, and then it has a trickle effect to us. Right. And I think that that's what we really have to be vigilant, about, is making sure that we have control of ourselves and that we have the freedom of choice to say, this is what you want people to do from your agenda. But what about us having the decision of being a free nation? Like, that's what we have written on our money. Like, one nation under God, like the Pledge of Allegiance, like the things that we were, indoctrinated to do when we were like grade school kids. Like, we knew that we had the one country that was free, and
Right.
we were able to like stand on that and say we stand for freedom. And now what's happening is our freedoms are being slowly taken away from us. And I think that we have to be hyper aware that by this happening to New York and California, it's going to have a downstream effect on state that I was born in, Iowa, state that I reside in, Colorado, and your state of Maine. What was the quote that you said? What happens in Maine?
As Maine goes, so goes the nation.
Very, very seldom do I find myself like choking up almost and like finding myself at the edge of tear, but it's something we have to be very aware of, and we have to stand up for something. I think there was somebody said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Right.
And I think that we have to be more unified than ever, and to know that we need to go out there. What is it, March? You have a ballot?
March 3rd, yes, it'll be our next general election. We'll be voting.
So do you have any call to action for people out there that are in Maine, or is there anything that people in other states can do to support you?
Yeah, they could definitely check out our website. Would be a huge help for people across the country to follow along with our fight. We will definitely have, I think, opportunities for people to get involved, whether they want to help with phone calls or anything like that. Donations is always a huge one. They can check out our site is rejectbigpharma.com. And we have a lot of information up there on the campaign itself, and just following along and paying attention to what's happening, in Maine. And as that pertains, a lot of people, I think, have felt like, well, that's each state has their own fight. New York has a fight, California has a fight. Each state has their own fight, but this is a unique opportunity where we have the first vote that's happening in the nation, the very first vote on the issue of a vaccine mandate. And because our state is so much smaller than other states, a lot of times corporate interests will try things here. They kind of refer to Maine as a cheap date because you can spend a lot less money and have a pretty significant influence in Maine. If you're a big corporate entity who wants to influence some special interest policy. So, the same goes in the polls. We have to influence a smaller number of voters than you would in, say, a California or New York if they were to do a referendum at some point. And so we really have the opportunity to kind of lead the way. And if we're successful, then that, paves the way for other states to also be able to defend their freedoms.
Well, I think it's very important that people step up and support you. I know that there's a lot of trouble that's going on politically, and I know that the more that we are unified, the less that we are able to be hoodwinked, if you will, within a overnight kind of like political move that we've seen happen time and time again. These things that get passed that no one really votes on, that no one really knows that's happening, and it just gets done. And then we're all up in arms. We're like, well, what could we have done to help this? How could we have prevented this? Why didn't anybody tell us? So then we come from this state of like awareness to hyper aware to how did this happen and who's to blame for this and what can we do now to make it better? And I think a lot of times when these things happen, nobody really understands the ramifications if they don't do something now. And I tell people this all the time. One of my favorite bands when I was growing up was Rage Against the Machine. And they said, if we don't take action now, then we'll settle for nothing later.
Right.
And if we don't take action now, then we will settle for nothing later. And that is what we'll have to settle for, is not having a choice.
Right.
And I think that when you do that call for people to say, hey, come support us, there's 3 ways you can support Cara and her initiative, and that's with your time, your talent, or your treasure. Right. And those are 3 things that we should be consistently looking for from people, is their time, which a lot of people have more time than they have money. Yes. And those that have more money than they have time, some of them are better with their talents. So if you have talents on running campaigns and getting support, those are the 3 ways that you can help Cara and her initiative out in Maine, which as Maine goes, the rest of the country will follow. So please support Cara and her initiatives. Will you put your website where people can join you and support you in the comments below after the interview's done?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. So if you guys are finding value from this interview today with Cara, please hashtag value in the comments. If you're watching, hashtag value in the comments. And if you guys would do us a huge favor and hit the share button, more people will get this messaging from what we're doing on this interview today, and more people will be able to know what's going on in Maine and how you can stand up and help this state initiative and the ballots in March. And is there anything that I maybe didn't ask you, Cara, that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I think, you covered it. I think for us, it's really been, as you said, it's about choice. And I think, the media propaganda really frequently will refer to these kind of movements as anti-vax. It's an anti-vaccine movement. People don't want kids getting vaccinated. It really, in our eyes, this issue is about vaccines, but it also has nothing to do with vaccines. It's really about defending freedom and having the choice to decide and make that informed decision yourselves. And there's really nothing more fundamental. There's no greater freedom than that, than choosing what goes into your body and your children's bodies. So we have, one of our canvassers, our top canvassers, a mom of 5 who collected 4,000 signatures. Her kids are vaccinated. We have plenty of people who participate in the effort and will be voting yes on one. It's question 1 in March. They'll be voting yes on one who fully believe in vaccination, but feel that it should be a choice. So that's really, for us, fundamentally what it comes down to.
Well, it's just like the chiropractic lifestyle. If we don't tell people the truth about chiropractic, then eventually people will be sold into
right.
Surgery comes to the chiropractic lifestyle. We want people to eat right, think right, move right, get adjusted, but we also want people to have the choice to do so. And like I said earlier, it's not so much about the MDs being against chiropractors. It's not the chiropractors being against MDs. It's the big pharma being in control of both parties and making them fight against each other. So that's where we come to this realization that it is a freedom of choice, but if we don't take action, then we are going to settle for the scraps. And people are going to tell us how we have to run our households. They're going to tell us how we have to send our kids to school. And then it's going to be a no choice system. So we have to take all opportunities that we have to actually fight for our rights and our freedoms. And that's something that's still fundamentally American. So if people still feel fundamentally American, then they should support what you're doing. And I think that if that doesn't start a fire under a few people's backsides, then we have to go and do this more consistently. And if you'd like to be a guest in future opportunities as we approach the new year and as we approach March, I'd love to have you on to talk about this so we can get you some more attention.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd be happy to come back on.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to close out then on this interview, and thank you, Cara, for sharing about the topic of Maine's freedom of choice and everything that you're doing grassroots level out there in Maine to stand up for the rights of your state, but not only the state, the rest of this nation. I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners out there that have been with us today. If you guys do find some value in this, please share this message. If you guys are finding some, if you're watching us on replay, just hashtag replay and just let us know where you guys are watching in from so we know where our audience is coming in from. And I'm going to close out by saying you're just one story away. Keep hustling. I'll see you guys on the next Facebook Live, and thank you for supporting Chiro Hustle. We'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to Chiro Hustle Live. Don't forget to subscribe and check back next week to continue hustling.